Did you ever wonder, how did the Beverly Hillbillies get to Beverly Hills? Then you should read Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. And before we get to the review, we have to answer one question. Did I enjoy the read? And the answer is yes. Welcome to Whiskey and Literature, where we read and discuss the greatest books of all time, and while we're turning those pages, we're sipping those bottles, those finely distilled spirits. I'm your host, Captain Mike, and I'm reading and reviewing 52 books in 52 weeks in 2023. This is my 22nd book review of the year so far, Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. And before we get to the review, let's talk about the author briefly. John Steinbeck, American author, born in 1902, died in 1968. He grew up and lived in California and drew from his early childhood and life experiences as inspirations into his novels. He won the 1962 Nobel Prize for Literature, and he wrote 33 books in his lifetime, 2 of which I have now read, Of Mice and Men and Grapes of Wrath. Okay. Specs and stats for Grapes of Wrath. It is an American realist novel first published in 1939. It was an instant phenomenon, publicly banned and burned, but most of all, it was read. Grapes of Wrath won both the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize for Literature. And my copy of the book is 455 pages long. I picked it up at the Goodwill bookstore for $3. What a deal. I did not listen to Grapes of Wrath at all on Audible. Okay, the style of the book. It's a fairly easy, fast read. I didn't quite blaze through the book, but almost. Themes include humanity versus dehumanization, dignity, faith, guilt, powerlessness, perseverance, family, friendship, community, and modernization. The story is told in an easy linear format, almost no flashbacks and no inner dialogue. And this book was written in an interesting format. It's like every other chapter goes from the actual story of the Joads to a general condition and trails and travails of the migrants who are traveling to California looking for work. It is very well done. All right, let's go through some of the characters in The Grapes of Wrath. And these were all fantastic characters. First, Tom Joad. He is a young man, the main character of the book. And even though he is a youngish guy, he does kind of take charge of the family as they are traveling west. Ma Joad. She is the family matriarch. And while she is down to earth, she can get fierce as she tries to keep the family together. Pa Joad. He's a hard-working family man, but after they lose their farm, he becomes a broken man and almost abrogates his responsibility to the family, to both Ma Joad and his son Tom. And then we have all the other cast of the Joad family. We have Al Joad, we have Rose of Sharon, we have Connie, we have Noah, Uncle John, we have the kids, Ruthie and Winfield, and Grandma and Grandpa. Traveling with the Joads, we have Jim Casey. He was a former preacher, and he travels with them to California. And then we have some other families that they meet on the way, or they meet at the camps. 2 of the most important are the Wilsons and the Wainwrights. All the characters are really well written, and that's all we're going to say about them. And let's move on to the plot of The Grapes of Wrath. So we start right off with Tom Joad, who has just been released from prison on parole. He was serving time for homicide that was in self-defense. While he's traveling home, he runs across Jim Casey, a former preacher that he knew from his childhood, and they both go together to his family home. They get to the house and there's nobody there. Now they run across another guy who's been displaced, and he tells them that his family is at his uncle's house. So Tom and Jim, they travel to his uncle's house. Once Tom and Jim arrive at Uncle John's house, they're greeted by the entire family, who is gathered together there because they've been displaced from their home, and they are gathering all their possessions together, selling what they don't need, and they bought an old sedan, which they converted kind of into a truck, and they're gonna load up all their stuff and all their people and travel to California, the land of milk and honey. They have some handbills that says there is plenty of work for plenty of good wages, and basically oranges and grapes are falling off the trees and vines, and come on out and get some work. Now, even knowing that leaving Oklahoma will violate Tom's parole, he goes anyway, and the former preacher Jim Casey decides to travel with them. So all together, traveling on Route 66 heading towards California, the Jode family runs across many migrants who are doing the exact same thing they are. Hundreds of thousands of people traveling to California looking for work because of the handbills. They also come across, as they camp for the night in road stops on the side of the road, they run across some migrants who have been to California, describe the working conditions as deplorable, and are trying to head back home. Thanks to the stories that they hear from the returning migrants, the family kind of worries that California might not be all that's promised. The family kind of dwindles as they travel. Grandpa dies first, Grandma dies second, and both Noah and Connie leave their family. Led by Ma, the family continues pressing on towards California. They finally arrive in California, which is overstuffed by migrants looking for work, willing to work for almost nothing, sometimes even just for food. And they've been exploited by the large growers to the point of starvation. The big corporate farmers are in kind of cahoots and collusion, and they one by one push out the smaller farmers. All the state and the local law enforcement, they're in the pockets of the growers who use them kind of as their bullies to get the migrants to do what they will. Once arriving in California, one of the first places that Joe would stay is at a Hooverville, kind of a shanty town on the outside of the town where they're working or trying to find work. The ex-preacher Casey, he's arrested for saying that he was the one that knocked down and kicked a sheriff. Then they moved on from the Hooverville, when it was going to get burned down, to Weed Patch, which was a federally run facility, one of the New Deal projects, which offered better conditions for the migrants, though it didn't offer work or food. And as a federal facility, that camp did its best that it could to protect the migrants from the local sheriffs and law enforcement. Casey, he gets out of jail and becomes a type of union labor organizer, and the Jodes end up on a plantation, and they work all day and only earn enough money to buy their food for the supper from the company store. So the next day, the strike is broken, and Casey is involved in a clash with local law enforcement, and he gets killed. After Tom Jode witnesses this attack, he actually attacks the attacker and kills him, and then he has to flee for his life. So then the Jode family leave that orchard and end up working in a cotton field, where Tom is not able to work. He just hides to try and keep himself and his family safe. So at this point in the story, Tom just leaves, and he bids his family farewell and trying to keep them safe by leaving and keeping them from being blacklisted and unable to work. And the family continues to work day after day, earning money that they can buy their food. Rose of Sharon, she has her baby, but it's stillborn. So Ma Jode is one of the only ones in the family who's still kind of remaining steadfast and helps the family through these troubling times. One day this big storm comes. There's a huge amount of rain. It's washing down the gullies. They're living in this boxcar from a train is up on blocks, and that's where they're living. And the water overflows the bank and the gully they're next to and comes into their compartment, forcing them to flee for drier ground. So as they're fleeing down the road, which is one of the high spots, they end up at a barn they see off the side of the road, and they get into this barn hoping that it will offer them some safety and some security from the rain and the elements. And they find in there a young man, a boy, and his father who is dying of starvation. So they're talking to these, and the boy is saying, please help my father. He is dying of starvation. And Ma Jode and Rose of Sharon, they look at each other and they share this silent communication and understanding what they have to do. Ma Jode gathers her group and the young man and takes him out of the barn, and Rose of Sharon feeds the father from her breast. And the story ends. Okay, having said all of that, what are my thoughts on Grapes of Wrath? I prefer when I finish a book before I script and film it to have some time pass, so it can kind of marinate around in my mind and my soul, and I can kind of think and ponder upon what I have just read. However, I just finished Grapes of Wrath a couple of hours ago, and here we are. And what a book it was. I keep thinking as I'm reading my 52 books in 52 weeks this year in 2023, I hit these books every now and again. I'm like, wow, that is the best book I've ever read. And no exception here. I just read Grapes of Wrath. I've never read it before. And what a fantastic book. And I'm only halfway through my reading this year so far. And Grapes of Wrath made me even more excited for my upcoming books and to see what else I have. How can it get any better? I'm going to read to you a quote from chapter 19 in Grapes of Wrath. How can you frighten a man whose hunger is not only in his own cramped stomach, but in the wretched bellies of his children? You can't scare him. He has known a fear beyond any other. That is a great quote that really drives home the desperation that these migrants felt as they are trying to find work simply to feed themselves day to day after day. From the first page to the last, I knew it was not going to end well for the Jode family. I mean, how could it? In true Game of Thrones style, by the end of the book, at least half the characters, the main characters, were either dead or missing. Steinbeck captured the Jode family's language, their family ties, and their fierce loyalty perfectly. From the little kids to grandma and grandpa, I felt like I was really along for the ride and even part of the family. I braced myself for what was going to happen every time Al tried to start the old Hudson, and I cheered it on as I was hoping it would be able to make it across the desert and up and over the mountains. I read the second half of this book in one sitting, and I was an emotional wreck when it was over. I wept with pain when Ruthie came into the boxcar and asked Ma, "Where is the baby at?" And Ma turns to her and says, "There was no baby. We was wrong." And the last chapter, the last scene, the last moment of the book, OMG. It just epitomizes the entire story. This willingness to sacrifice and give of oneself, anything and everything, to help those who are less fortunate than yourself. Even those who might be less fortunate are not actually less fortunate than you yourself are. Guys, this truly was an amazing read. I am ashamed that I did not read Grapes of Wrath earlier in my life, and I am so glad that I now have. And if you have not read Grapes of Wrath, what are you waiting for? So how about it? Have you read Grapes of Wrath? Have you read Of Mice and Men, any John Steinbeck? I've read Of Mice and Men, and I've read now Grapes of Wrath. Anything else? Have you read East of Eden or any of his other works that I should maybe look into next year? If you have, drop it in the comment section below. I would love to know what your thoughts are on this book. I thought it was amazing. Okay guys, on to the star rating. And I judge all my books on 5 criteria, 6 if I listened to it on Audible, and I did not listen to this at all on Audible. So let's go through it. First, initial response. How do I feel as soon as I finished the book? And man, I felt amazing. I was amazed when I turned that last page and I finished the book. Loved it. 5. Okay, 2, recommendation. How likely am I to recommend this book? And I'm only going to give it a 4 because I do think it's a bit of a mature book. And to be honest, while I didn't read this earlier in my life, I think it's okay because I do think I appreciate this more as I'm older. All right, so 4. All right, so number 5, style. Did I enjoy the writing style? And I did. I really enjoyed. Nice, easy, fast read. It was fantastic. Plot and the structure. How engaged was I in this story? Every page turner after, man, it was a 5. I enjoyed every page of this book. And number 5, the characters. And I gave it a 5 because they were relatable, believable, and engaging. Man, I felt for them all. I loved every character in this book. They were fantastic. So, okay, that's 24. And 24 divided by 5 is 4.8 stars. So 4.8 stars for Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Definitely well deserved. Okay guys, thanks for sticking with me. If you enjoyed the video, like it, it's free. Subscribe to see more of my content. I do both book and whiskey reviews. I hope you are reading something good and drinking something great. Turn the pages, my friends, and stay thirsty. Cheers.